So, Mr. Tebow, is there anything that should dictate whether or not someone gets a job in the DoD other than who is most qualified?
No, Congressman. For that specific job, no. Whoever can do the job, whatever job it is best, should get it.
Should we consider whether or not the job's in a red state or a blue state?
No.
Should we consider a state's critical race theory perspectives?
No.
Should we consider a state's thoughts on gender ideology? Should we consider thoughts on a state's abortion policy?
No, Congressman.
Mr. Greenway, can you think of anything other than the person's skill and their quality to align to the job that should be more important?
No, Congressman.
None of the things I mentioned?
None.
And why shouldn't a state's abortion policy influence what person gets what job in the military?
Because the military's unique responsibility is to perform in circumstances where no other part of our government can, or is expected to. And that environment is unforgiving. And so the standard has to be prerequisite. And in this case, I don't think we can afford to fail in the defense of our nation and its citizens because we compromise in that.
And is that the same for like a state's maybe gender policy? If you don't want the third grade teacher picking your kid's gender, that shouldn't really impact who gets what job in the military, should it?
No, absolutely not, Congressman.
Mr. Levine, do you share that perspective?
Absolutely. I absolutely do, Congressman. We have a very diverse military. It reflects the diversity of American society, and if we were to pick and choose based on the views of people who are in the military, it would be very destructive to the military.
And we shouldn't pick or choose based on the views of a state legislature either, should we?
I can't see why we would.
Yeah, I can't either. I'm glad to hear that universally presented. So, you know, Mr. Tebow, if someone were to say, look, first I look at who's most qualified, but then I also look at maybe what a state's abortion policies or gender policies are, what's the risk of melding those things into one analysis about what jobs people do in the military?
I think it creates, two sides to a coin that doesn't exist, Congressman. You can either make it about who is most qualified, not merely who is qualified, or you can make it about other factors that a person doesn't choose, like their race or sex, or like the state in which they may serve. And you can either admit that those latter factors don't matter and just choose who's most qualified anyways, or you can make compromises on who is truly the best person for each job based on other factors that have been deemed priorities from some spot in the chain of command. And I think that's what many of these diversity initiatives lead to.
And so as I understand that, you're presenting a binary paradigm. Either it's the one most qualified, and then we have a meritocracy, or it's the one most qualified plus anything else blended into that decision. You would say that is not a meritocracy.
I think it creates a slippery slope to where you are making a choice about something else. And I think you're right, Congressman.
Mr. Greenway, do you agree that it's that binary, that once you start bleeding into the decision-making process, these other factors and other things, you can say that you consider first the qualifications, but really once it becomes muddled with something other than qualifications, the meritocracy train has kind of left the station?
Absolutely.
With my remaining minute, I'm going to play a video.
Since January of this year, more than 400 anti-LGBTQ+ laws have been introduced at the state level. That number is rising and demonstrates a trend that could be dangerous for service members, their families, and the readiness of the force as a whole. When I look at potential candidates, say for squadron command, I strive to match the right person to the right job. I consider their job performance and relevant experience first. However, I also look at their personal circumstances, and their family is also an important factor. If a good match for a job does not feel safe being themselves and performing at their highest potential at a given location, or if their family could be denied critical health care due to the laws in that state, I am compelled to consider a different candidate and perhaps less qualified.
So I guess I have the same question that I had for the last panel, and I'll start with you, General Miller. Should a state's gender policy affect who is aligned to what position in the military?
Absolutely not. It's the needs of the Air Force.
Yeah, so it shouldn't be the abortion policy either?
It's the needs of the Air Force and where the
Right. I just want to be really, I want to draw a fine point on it. The needs of the Air Force
Yes.
do not require the Air Force to consider a state's abortion policy or gender policy before assigning a service member to a position in that particular state?
We do not.
Okay, so what was that general on that video talking about when she said that there are 400 anti-LGBTQ laws that have to be considered before she aligns an applicant to a position?
Congressman, I cannot speak for General Burt and what she was talking about there.
Maybe you can tell us, Ms. Kelly. What was she talking about?
Sir, my understanding of what her intent behind those comments is that she's really describing the assignments matching process in the Space Force.
Okay.
And that's what I believe she was describing.
Right. Okay, so when I get that, that's pretty evident. But in that assignments matching process, should a state's abortion policy come into play?
So I don't want to speak for her, sir, but I will tell you.
I'm asking you.
And
Should a state's abortion policy come into play?
what we take into account in the Space Force is the needs of the service, the guardian themselves, and whether they're qualified for the job.
Do you take into account a state's abortion policy?
We take into account the preference of the individual if they're interested in the particular job.
Okay, fascinating. I'm not asking about those things. I'm asking about whether or not you take into account a state's abortion policy.
We do not. 'Cause
Okay,
the needs
do you
of the
take into
service-
account a state's LGBTQ policy, whatever that is?
No, we do not, Congressman.
Okay, so why did your fellow space warrior with a bunch of stars on her, lapel stand up and give a speech that said when she's aligning someone to a particular job, she's evaluating these 400 anti-LGBTQ policies? Why did she say that?
Sir, I can't speak for why she said that.
Was that a mistake?
It certainly doesn't reflect what our processes are and what I know.
All right,
them to
okay,
be.
so this is a moment here. This is a bit of a moment because we heard a senior person in the Space Force say one thing, and then you're here in front of a congressional committee saying that that is not what the Space Force believes. So I got to get to the bottom of this. So I sent a letter to General Burt saying, you've said that there are these 400 anti-LGBTQ policies that you are actively considering when aligning people to jobs. So I said, list them. Like, if there are 400 of them, I'd love to read them. And the answer that I got back from someone called Alex Wagner is that to answer your specific request, the Department of Air Force does not maintain a list of pending or enacted laws that impact military readiness. So does the Space Force have such a list?
No, we do not, Congressman.
We are policymakers that have to make decisions based on the representations of people who work at the Pentagon, right? And what you're providing us are conflicting and irreconcilable representations. And then when we ask follow-up questions so that we might be able to reconcile those things, the answer is we don't have a list. So as you're here today, can you just clear it up by denouncing those comments and saying that they are not the practice of what you all do?
Sir, I've described the practice that we do, and we do ask guardians for their preferences on duty assignment, and we try to match guardians.
Okay, so
we
if one
can.
of those preferences is someone saying, I don't like Florida's views on critical race theory, would you consider that and whether or not to send that person to Florida?
No, the
Okay,
guardian
so
would,
what if they said the abortion policy? Would you consider that?
sir, the guardian would have to prove that there is some sort of hardship to them, which I
But
would,
you don't accept as a de facto hardship that a 6-week abortion ban is a hardship, right?
that is not in our policy, no, sir.
I'm just trying to figure this out, Mr. Chairman. And I think we might have to do further investigative work to maybe get General Burt here to, it is unfair to ask you to characterize those comments, but at the end of the day, we have to figure out where to send the money and what authorities and restraints to put on that money. And if General Burt has gone rogue and engaged in some ultra-virus act to create a secret list of 400 policies that she deems discriminatory, I'd sure like the committee to see them. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.